In the middle of a brutal winter storm on the open prairie, a man who spent years running from his past finds two dying sisters buried in the snow. He could walk away, keep his isolation intact, his grief untouched, but something in their frozen faces cracks through the walls he's built. The choice he makes in that frozen moment will drag him into a fight he never wanted, against enemies he can't see coming. Sometimes saving a life means risking everything you've spent years protecting. This is that story. If you're watching, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. Caleb Rourke leaned into it, one boot in front of the other, his face wrapped in a wool scarf that had frozen stiff against his mouth. The snow came sideways, hard enough to sting through his coat. He couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead, maybe less. Didn't matter. He knew this land. Every fence post, every dip in the ground, every stone that would trip a man who wasn't paying attention. He was paying attention. The fence line ran along the north pasture, and if it came down in this storm, he'd lose what little livestock he had left. 3 cows. A dozen chickens that were probably huddled together in the barn, scared out of their minds. Not much of a ranch anymore. Not much of anything, really. But it was his, and he'd be damned if he let the weather take what little remained. His gloved hand found the fence post. Solid. He moved to the next one, testing the wire. Still taut. Good. He kept moving, counting posts in his head, the numbers a rhythm that kept his mind from drifting to places it shouldn't go. 7, 8, 9. That's when he saw it. A shape in the snow, dark against the white. Too big to be an animal, too still. Caleb stopped. The wind tore at his coat. His first instinct was to turn back. Whatever it wasn't his problem. He had enough problems. The fence still needed checking. The barn door was hanging crooked. The roof over the porch had a leak he hadn't fixed before the snow hit. But his feet didn't move. He stood there, squinting through the storm, and the shape didn't disappear. Didn't shift. Just sat there in the snow like it had been dropped from the sky. Hell, he muttered. He walked toward it, slow, careful. The snow was deep here, past his knees in places. And the last thing he needed was to fall and break something. He was 43 years old and alone. A broken leg out here meant death. The shape became clearer. Not one shape. 2. 2 people. Sitting back to back. Buried up to their waists in snow. Caleb's breath caught. He moved faster, stumbling now, his boots punching through the drifts. When he reached them, he dropped to his knees and brushed the snow away from the first face. A woman. Young. Maybe 20, 22. Her skin was gray, lips blue. Her eyes were closed. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. No. Wait. There. Faint, so faint he almost missed it. He turned to the second person. Another woman, same age, same gray skin, same blue lips. When he wiped the snow from her face, his stomach dropped. They were identical. Twins. Christ, he said. His voice came out rough, cracked. He hadn't spoken to another person in 3 months. What the hell happened to you? Neither of them answered. Of course they didn't. They were barely alive. Caleb looked back toward his cabin. A quarter mile through the storm. Maybe more. He looked at the sisters again. They weren't going to make it. Not like this. Not without help. He could leave them, go back to his fence line, finish his work. By the time he came back, they'd be gone. Frozen. Peaceful. Not his responsibility. His wife's voice drifted through his head, soft and insistent. You don't get to choose who needs help, Caleb. You just help. I know, he said aloud. I know. He stood, shaking the snow from his coat, and grabbed the first sister under her arms. She was lighter than he expected. Too light. He dragged her a few feet, then went back for the second one. The snow fought him every step. His boots slipped. His back screamed. But he kept moving, one sister at a time, hauling them through the drifts like sacks of grain. It took him an hour to reach the cabin. Maybe longer. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the wind, the snow, and the weight of 2 lives he hadn't asked for. He kicked the door open and dragged them inside, one after the other. The cabin was small, one room with a fireplace, a bed, a table, and not much else. He dropped the first sister by the fire and went back for the second. His legs shook. His hands were numb. He didn't care. When both sisters were inside, he slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. The fire was still burning, low and steady, the only sound in the cabin besides his own ragged breath. He looked at the sisters. They hadn't moved, hadn't opened their eyes, just lay there on his floor, pale and still as corpses. "Don't you die on me," he said. His voice was hard, angry. "Not in my house." He grabbed blankets from the bed and wrapped them tight around both women. Then he built up the fire until the flames roared, filling the cabin with heat. He boiled water, filled 2 tin cups, and knelt beside the first sister. He lifted her head, pressing the cup to her lips. "Come on," he said. "Drink." The water spilled down her chin. She didn't swallow. He tried again. This time her throat moved, just a little. Enough. He did the same with the second sister. She swallowed too, barely. But it was something. Caleb sat back on his heels, staring at them. He didn't know their names, didn't know where they'd come from or how they'd ended up buried in the snow, didn't know if they'd even survived the night. But they were here, in his cabin, under his roof, and that meant they were his problem now. The first sister woke just before dawn. Caleb was sitting at the table drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them in the snow, 2 frozen shapes that shouldn't have been there. Her eyes opened slowly, confused. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then turned her head and saw him. She didn't scream, didn't move, just watched him with dark, wary eyes. "You're alive," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. She didn't respond. Her gaze shifted to the fire, then to the blankets wrapped around her, then back to him. "Your sister's alive too," he added, nodding toward the second woman. "Barely, but she's breathing." The first sister's lips moved, but no sound came out. Caleb stood and crossed to the fire, pouring hot water into a cup. He brought it to her and held it out. "Drink," he said. She hesitated. Her hand came out from under the blanket, shaking, and took the cup. She lifted it to her lips and drank in small, careful sips. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. She lowered the cup. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Ayla." "Ayla," he repeated. He nodded toward the other woman. "That your sister?" "Yes." "She got a name?" "Sarah." Caleb sat back down at the table. "I'm Caleb. This is my cabin. You were about 2 minutes from dead when I found you." Ayla looked at him, then at her sister, then back at him. Where are we?" "North pasture, 1/4 mile from here. You were buried in the snow." "How long?" "You've been here about 6 hours. Sun's coming up." He paused. "You want to tell me what you were doing out there?" Ayla didn't answer right away. She just stared into the cup, her fingers trembling around the rim. "We were running," she said finally. "From what?" Her jaw tightened. "People." Caleb waited. When she didn't continue, he said, "What kind of people?" "The kind that burn everything." The words hung in the air. Caleb didn't push. He'd seen enough in his life to know when someone was carrying weight they didn't want to share. He let the silence stretch, watching the fire instead of her. Finally, Ayla spoke again. "There was a settlement, small, 40, maybe 50 people. We lived there. It was safe." Her voice cracked. "They came at night, men on horses. They didn't ask for anything, just started shooting, burning." Caleb's hands tightened around his cup. "We ran," Ayla continued. "Me and Sarah. We didn't have time to think. We just ran. The storm hit. We couldn't see, couldn't feel our hands. We sat down to rest just for a minute and then..." She trailed off. "You found us." "You know who they were?" Caleb asked. "The men who burned your settlement?" "Raiders. That's what people call them. They move through the territory, taking what they want, killing anyone who stands in the way." Caleb set his cup down. "They track you?" "I don't know." "You think they did?" Ayla looked at him, and for the first time he saw fear flicker across her face. "I don't know." Caleb stood and walked to the window. The storm had passed. The sun was rising over the prairie, turning the snow orange and gold. Beautiful, quiet, deceptive. "You can stay here until you're strong enough to move," he said. "After that, you'll need to figure out where you're going." "We don't have anywhere to go." "Then figure it out anyway." His voice was harder than he meant it to be. He didn't turn around. I'm not running a charity. Behind him, Ayla was silent. He heard her shift under the blankets, heard the crackle of the fire. When she spoke again, her voice was small. Thank you for saving us. Caleb didn't respond. He just stood at the window, staring out at the snow, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Well, Sarah woke 2 hours later. Caleb was outside, checking the damage from the storm. 3 fence posts down. The barn door completely off its hinges. One of the cows dead in the snow, frozen solid. He stood over the carcass for a long time, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. When he came back inside, Sarah was sitting up, wrapped in blankets, staring at the fire. Ayla sat beside her, whispering something Caleb couldn't hear. Both sisters looked up when he entered. "You're Sarah," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. Her eyes were the same dark brown as her sister's, but there was something sharper in them. Less fear, more suspicion. "Your sister told me what happened," Caleb said. He crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee. "Raiders, fire, running." "She told you everything?" Sarah asked. "Enough." "Then you know we can't stay." Caleb turned, cup in hand. "I already told her that." "Good." Sarah stood shakily, using the wall for support. "We'll leave today." "Sit down," Caleb said. "We're not your problem." "You're half dead. You leave now, you'll be all dead by nightfall. Sit down." Sarah glared at him. For a moment, Caleb thought she might argue, but then her legs gave out, and she dropped back onto the blankets with a frustrated grunt. "You can stay until you're strong," Caleb said. "That's not up for debate. After that, you go where you want. But you're not leaving here today." "Why do you care?" Sarah asked. "I don't." "Then why help us?" Caleb didn't answer. He just turned back to the stove, staring into his coffee like it held some kind of answer. Behind him, Ayla whispered something to her sister. Sarah didn't respond. The silence in the cabin felt heavier than the snow outside. The next 2 days passed slowly. The sisters slept most of the time, their bodies recovering from the cold. Caleb kept the fire burning and made sure they ate beans, bread, dried meat, simple food. He didn't talk much, and they didn't ask questions. On the 3rd morning, Ayla started helping. She didn't ask permission, just stood up, walked to the stove, and started washing the dishes. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said. "I know." He watched her for a moment, then went back to mending a torn saddle strap. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently. She didn't look at him. "Where'd you learn to work like that?" he asked. "My mother," Ayla said. "She taught us everything. Cooking, cleaning, how to stitch wounds, how to shoot." Caleb looked up. "Shoot?" "Rifles. My father made sure we knew how." She paused, her hand stilling in the water. "He's dead now." "Sorry. So's my mother." Ayla dried her hands on a cloth. "Raiders killed them both, killed most everyone." Caleb set the saddle strap down. "How many got out?" "Just us." Her voice was flat, empty. "Just me and Sarah." She turned and walked back to the fire, sitting down beside her sister. Caleb didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything to say. That night, Sarah finally spoke to him. They were sitting at the table, Caleb on one side, the sisters on the other. He'd made stew, and they ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against tin bowls. "You live alone," Sarah said. Caleb nodded. "Why?" "None of your business." "You wear a ring." Caleb's hand stilled. He looked down at the gold band on his left hand. He'd worn it so long he forgot it was there most days. "Wore," he corrected. Past tense. "She die?" Ayla started. "It's fine," Caleb said. He set his spoon down. "Yeah, she died 5 years ago. Fever." "I'm sorry," Ayla said softly. Caleb shrugged. "Long time ago." "Doesn't make it easier," Sarah said. He looked at her. She held his gaze, unflinching. There was no pity in her eyes, just understanding. "No," Caleb said. "It doesn't." Sarah nodded and went back to her stew. The conversation ended there, but something had shifted. Not much, just enough. Chet. On the 5th day, the weather broke. The sun came out, bright and blinding against the snow. Caleb went outside to finish repairing the fence, and when he came back, he found Ayla and Sarah standing by the window, staring out at the prairie. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ayla said. "It's cold," Caleb replied. Still beautiful. He walked past them to the stove. You two feeling better? Much, Ayla said. Thank you. Good, then we need to talk. Both sisters turned to face him. Caleb poured coffee, then leaned against the counter. You can't stay here forever, he said. We know, Sarah replied. So what's the plan? The sisters exchanged a glance. Ayla looked down at her hands. Sarah crossed her arms. We don't have one, Sarah admitted. Then make one. It's not that simple. Sure it is. Pick a direction. Start walking. Find a town. Start over. And if the raiders find us again, Sarah asked, then you run again. That's not a life. It's the life you've got. Sarah's jaw tightened. You really don't care, do you? I told you, you're not my problem. Then why save us at all? Caleb didn't answer. He just took a long drink of his coffee and stared at the wall. We'll leave tomorrow, Ayla said quietly. We won't trouble you anymore. Caleb nodded. Good. But that night, lying in his bed while the sisters slept by the fire, he stared at the ceiling and couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a mistake. They didn't leave the next day, or the day after that, because on the sixth night, the raiders came. Caleb woke to the sound of horses. He sat up fast, his hand already reaching for the rifle beside his bed. The cabin was dark except for the dying embers of the fire. The sisters were asleep, curled together under their blankets. The sound came again. Hoofbeats. Multiple. Getting closer. Get up, Caleb said, his voice low and sharp. Ayla stirred first. What? Quiet. He was already moving, pulling on his boots, checking the rifle. Someone's outside. Sarah sat up, instantly alert. How many? Don't know. Stay here. Like hell, Sarah said. She stood, crossing to the window. She peered out through the crack in the shutters, then went very still. 4 men, on horses. Caleb joined her at the window. She was right. 4 riders sitting just beyond the fence line, silhouetted against the moonlit snow. Raiders, Ayla whispered from behind them. You sure? Caleb asked. I'm sure. One of the riders dismounted. He walked toward the cabin, slow and deliberate, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Open the door, friend, the man called out. His voice was rough, amused. We're just looking for some lost property. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. Lost property? He called back. 2 girls, twins. You seen them? Beside him, Ayla's breath hitched. Sarah's face had gone pale. Haven't seen anyone, Caleb said. The man laughed. That's a lie. We tracked them here. Footprints in the snow don't lie, friend. Don't call me friend. Fair enough. The man took another step closer. Here's how this works. You give us the girls, we leave peaceful. You don't, and we burn this place to the ground with you in it. Caleb looked at the sisters. Ayla was shaking. Sarah's hands were clenched into fists. He turned back to the window. You can try, he said. Then he raised the rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the night, shattering the silence. The bullet hit the snow 2 feet in front of the raider, kicking up powder. The man froze. Next one goes through your chest, Caleb said. His voice was calm, cold. Your choice. For a long moment, no one moved. The raider stared at the cabin. Caleb stared back, the rifle steady in his hands. Then the man smiled. It was a slow, ugly smile. You just made a big mistake, friend. He turned and walked back to his horse. The 4 riders sat there for another moment, watching the cabin. Then they turned and rode off into the darkness. Caleb didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. When he finally did, his hands were shaking. They'll be back, Sarah said. I know, Caleb replied, with more men. I know. Ayla stepped forward, her voice breaking. You shouldn't have done that. You should have given us to them. Caleb turned to face her. His expression was hard, unreadable. Nobody's getting given to anyone, he said. Not in my house. They'll kill you. Maybe. He walked past her and set the rifle down on the table. But they'll have to work for it. Sarah crossed her arms. Why? Why protect us? You said we weren't your problem. Caleb looked at her, then at Ayla, then at the fire, still burning low and steady in the hearth. Maybe I was wrong, he said, and for the first time in 5 years, the silence in the cabin didn't feel so heavy. The sun came up cold and pale. the kind of light that made the snow look like broken glass. Caleb hadn't slept. He'd spent the night at the window, rifle across his lap, watching the horizon for movement that never came. The raiders were out there somewhere, waiting, planning. He knew the type. They didn't make threats they didn't intend to keep. Behind him, the sisters stirred. He heard Ayla sit up first, the rustle of blankets. Then Sarah's voice, low and rough with sleep. They didn't come back. Not yet, Caleb said. He didn't turn around. Sarah came to stand beside him at the window. She looked out at the empty prairie, then at him. Her hair was tangled, her face still marked with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. You really think you can hold them off? Don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. She studied him for a moment, then crossed her arms. You're stubborn. So I've been told. Stubborn gets people killed. So does running. He finally looked at her. You want to leave, leave. I'm not stopping you. Sarah's jaw tightened. We'd be dead in a day. Maybe. Definitely. She turned away from the window. They won't stop. Not until they find us. Then we make sure they don't. Ayla joined them, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She looked smaller in the morning light, younger, scared. What do we do? She asked. Caleb set the rifle down and walked to the stove. He poured water into a pot and set it to boil. We prepare. You two know how to shoot? Our father taught us, Sarah said. How good are you? Good enough? That's not an answer either. Sarah's eyes narrowed. I can hit what I aim at. Can you hit it when it's shooting back? She didn't respond. Caleb nodded, unsurprised. That's what I thought. We're not soldiers, Ayla said quietly. You don't have to be. You just have to not panic. He spooned coffee grounds into the pot. They come back, they'll come at night again. Maybe 4 men, maybe more. They'll surround the cabin, try to smoke us out or burn us down. We need to be ready. Ready how? Sarah asked. Extra ammunition, water, food, anything that burns gets moved away from the walls. He looked at them both. And you two need to decide right now if you can pull a trigger when it counts. Ayla's face went pale. Sarah just stared at him, her expression unreadable. I can, Sarah said finally. You sure? I watched them kill my father, watched them burn everything. Yes, I'm sure. Caleb turned to Ayla. She was trembling, her hands clutching the blanket tight around her shoulders. I don't know, she whispered. That's honest. He poured 3 cups of coffee and handed them out. You don't have to shoot, but you need to stay calm. Panic gets people killed faster than bullets. Ayla nodded, though she didn't look convinced. They drank their coffee in silence, the only sound the bubble of the pot on the stove and the wind rattling the shutters. Outside, the prairie stretched out empty and white, beautiful, deadly. Caleb set his cup down. Get dressed. We've got work to do. They spent the morning fortifying. Caleb moved everything flammable away from the walls, blankets, wood, anything that could catch. He dragged the table to the center of the room and stacked bags of flour and grain around it, creating a low barrier. It wouldn't stop bullets, but it might slow them down. Sarah helped without being asked. She worked quickly, efficiently, her movements sharp and precise. Ayla tried to help too, but her hands shook so badly she dropped a tin of salt, spilling it across the floor. Sorry, she said, kneeling to clean it up. Leave it, Caleb said. He was checking the rifle, making sure the action was smooth. It doesn't matter. I'm useless. You're scared. That's different. Ayla looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. How do you do it? How do you stay calm? Caleb didn't answer right away. He pulled a rag through the rifle barrel, checked the sight, then set it aside. I don't, he said finally. I just don't let it show. That's the same thing. No, it's not. He met her gaze. Being scared is fine. It keeps you sharp. But if you let it control you, you're already dead. Ayla wiped her eyes and stood. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. By midday, the cabin looked different, sparse, tactical. The warmth was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. Caleb stood in the center of the room and surveyed their work. It'll do, he said. Sarah was at the window again, watching the horizon. They'll come tonight. Probably. How many do you think? More than 4. He walked to the gun rack on the wall and pulled down a second rifle. He checked it, then held it out to Sarah. "You know how to use this?" She took it, testing the weight. "Yes." "Show me." Sarah lifted the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at the far wall. Her grip was steady, her posture solid. She lowered it and looked at him. "Good enough?" "Good enough." He pulled down a third rifle, older, heavier, and handed it to Ayla. "What about you?" Ayla took it hesitantly. She tried to lift it to her shoulder, but the weight threw her off balance. She staggered, and Caleb caught her arm. "Easy," he said. He adjusted her grip, moved her hands into the right position. "Left hand here, right hand on the trigger guard, but tight against your shoulder or the recoil will knock you down." Ayla tried again. This time she managed to hold it steady. "Better," Caleb said. He stepped back. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to point and shoot. Can you do that?" "I think so." "You think or you know?" Ayla's hands tightened on the rifle. "I know." "Good." He turned to Sarah. "How much ammunition do you have?" "None. We lost everything." Caleb walked to a cabinet in the corner and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were cartridges, loose and tarnished with age. He counted them out, then divided them into 3 piles. 30 rounds each. Make them count. Sarah picked up her share and stuffed them into her pockets. Ayla did the same, though her movements were slower, uncertain. "What if it's not enough?" she asked. "Then we make do with less." Caleb loaded his own rifle, the motions automatic, practiced. "They'll come at night. We'll have the cabin. They'll be in the open. That's an advantage." "Not much of one," Sarah said. "It's what we've got." The afternoon passed slowly. They ate cold beans and stale bread, no one wanting to risk the smoke from a fire. Caleb kept watch at the window while the sisters rested, though neither of them slept. The silence in the cabin was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of wood or the distant howl of wind. As the sun began to set, painting the snow orange and red, Caleb finally spoke. "When they come, stay low. Don't fire until I do. Don't waste shots. And if things go bad, if they get inside, you run. Straight out the back into the prairie. Don't stop. Don't look back." "What about you?" Ayla asked. "Don't worry about me." "That's not an answer." Caleb looked at her. "It's the only one you're getting." Sarah stood and checked her rifle for the 3rd time. "They're going to kill us, aren't they?" "Not if I can help it. That's not good enough. It's all I've got." The sun dropped below the horizon, and darkness swallowed the prairie. They came 2 hours after nightfall. Caleb heard them before he saw them. Hoofbeats in the snow, low voices, the jingle of harnesses. He stood at the window, rifle in hand, and counted the shapes moving through the darkness. 6. Maybe 7. Hard to tell. "Sarah," he said quietly, "take the left window. Ayla, stay behind the table. Don't move unless I tell you." Sarah crossed to the left side of the cabin and positioned herself by the shutters. Her hands were steady on the rifle. Ayla crouched behind the table, her face pale in the dim light of the fire. The riders stopped just beyond the fence line. One of them dismounted, a tall man with a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The same man from the night before. "Last chance, friend," he called out. "Give us the girls and we ride away." Caleb didn't answer. The man waited, then shrugged. "Have it your way." He turned and nodded to the other riders. 2 of them dismounted and moved toward the cabin, one on each side. The others stayed on their horses, rifles across their laps. "They're splitting up," Sarah whispered. "I see them." Caleb tracked the man on the right with his rifle. "Wait." The 2 men reached the cabin walls. One pulled something from his coat, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. He struck a match. "Fire," Caleb said, and squeezed the trigger. The shot shattered the night. The man with the bottle dropped, clutching his shoulder. The bottle fell into the snow and went out. The second man raised his pistol and fired blind. The bullet punched through the shutters and buried itself in the far wall. Sarah returned fire, her shot kicking up snow at the man's feet. He stumbled back, then turned and ran. "Reload," Caleb said. The riders outside were shouting now, circling the cabin. One of them fired at the window. The bullet splintered the shutter and Caleb ducked, splinters raining down on his head. "Sarah, you hit?" "No." "Ayla?" "I'm okay." Caleb rose and fired again, aiming for the lead rider, The man jerked in his saddle but didn't fall. The horse reared, panicked, and bolted into the darkness. Another bottle arced through the air, trailing fire. It hit the roof and shattered, flames spreading across the shingles. "Roof's on fire," Sarah said. "I know." Caleb fired twice more, driving the riders back. "Keep them off the walls." The flames spread fast, crackling and spitting. Smoke poured into the cabin, thick and choking. Ayla coughed, her eyes streaming. "Caleb, stay down." The tall man was shouting orders now, his voice cutting through the chaos. The riders regrouped, 3 of them advancing on foot, while the others provided cover fire. Bullets hammered the walls, punching through wood and rattling dishes. Caleb fired, reloaded, fired again. Beside him, Sarah did the same, her jaw set, her eyes hard. One of the advancing men went down, clutching his leg. The other 2 dove behind a snowdrift. "We can't hold them," Sarah said. "We don't have to. We just have to make them think twice." The fire on the roof roared now, bright and angry. The heat was intense, baking the air inside the cabin. Smoke filled Caleb's lungs. He coughed, eyes burning, but kept his rifle up. Another man broke cover, sprinting for the cabin. Caleb tracked him, squeezed the trigger. Nothing. The rifle jammed. "Damn it!" Sarah swung her rifle around and fired. The man stumbled and fell, clutching his chest. "Nice shot," Caleb said. He cleared the jam and reloaded. But the cabin was burning now, the fire spreading from the roof to the walls. The heat was unbearable. Ayla was coughing hard, doubled over behind the table. "We have to get out," she gasped. "Not yet." "Caleb, not yet." The tall man stepped forward, his pistol raised. He fired 3 times in quick succession. The bullets tore through the window frame, and Caleb felt one graze his shoulder, a hot, burning line that made him hiss. He returned fire. The tall man staggered but didn't go down. "Stubborn bastard," Caleb muttered. The man raised his pistol again and then stopped. He looked at the burning cabin, at his fallen men, at the 2 women and 1 man who refused to die. And he smiled. "Hell of a fight, friend," he called out. Then he turned to his remaining men. "Mount up." They didn't argue. The 3 men still standing climbed onto their horses and rode off into the darkness, leaving their dead behind. Caleb watched them go, rifle still raised, waiting for the trick. But they didn't come back. They just rode until they disappeared into the night, swallowed by the prairie. "They're leaving," Sarah said, disbelief in her voice. "For now." "Why?" "Because they didn't expect a fight." Caleb lowered his rifle. "They'll be back. But not tonight." Ayla stood, her face streaked with soot and tears. The cabin? I know. The roof was fully engulfed now, flames licking at the sky. There was no saving it. Caleb grabbed a bucket of water and threw it on the nearest wall, trying to contain the spread, but it was useless. "Get outside," he said. "Take what you can carry." They moved fast. Sarah grabbed the rifles and ammunition. Ayla snatched up blankets and what little food remained. Caleb took his saddlebag, his knife, and the photograph from the mantel, his wife, smiling in the sun. They stumbled out into the snow just as the roof collapsed, sending sparks and embers spiraling into the night sky. The 3 of them stood there, watching the cabin burn, the heat pushing against their faces even from a distance. "What do we do now?" Ayla asked. Caleb shouldered his rifle and started walking toward the barn. "We survive." The barn was still standing, barely. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and half the roof was missing, but it was shelter. Caleb pushed inside, the sisters following. It smelled like hay and old leather, and the cold seeped through the walls, but it was better than nothing. "We can't stay here long," Sarah said. She set the rifles down and rubbed her arms. "They'll burn this too." "I know." Caleb dropped his saddlebag and looked around. There were 3 stalls, a loft half filled with hay, and an old wagon missing a wheel. Not much, but enough. "We'll rest here tonight. Move at first light." "Move where?" Ayla asked. "Away." "That's not a plan." "It's better than staying." He pulled a blanket from his saddlebag and handed it to her. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Sarah took a blanket too, but she didn't lie down. She sat against the wall, rifle across her lap, staring at the barn door. "You should sleep too," Caleb said. "So should you." "I will." Liar. He almost smiled. Almost. Ayla curled up in the hay, the blanket pulled tight around her. Within minutes, her breathing evened out, exhaustion pulling her under. Sarah stayed awake, her eyes never leaving the door. Caleb sat beside her, his back against the cold wood. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but it wasn't bad. He'd had worse. "You hit?" Sarah asked. "Grazed?" "Let me see." "It's fine." "Let me see." He sighed and shrugged off his coat. Sarah leaned in, inspecting the wound by the faint light filtering through the broken roof. The bullet had torn through his shirt and left a shallow furrow across his shoulder, still bleeding sluggishly. "It needs cleaning," she said. "It needs to stop bleeding. That's good enough." Sarah tore a strip from her own shirt and wrapped it around his shoulder, tying it tight. Her hands were quick, practiced. "Your father teach you that too?" Caleb asked. "No. My mother." She finished the knot and sat back. "She was a healer, taught us how to stitch, how to set bones, said everyone should know how to keep someone alive. Smart woman. She was." Sarah's voice went quiet. "Didn't help her in the end." Caleb didn't respond. There was nothing to say. They sat in silence, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the walls. "Why'd you do it?" Sarah asked finally. "Do what?" "Stay. Fight. You could have turned us over, saved yourself." Caleb stared at the barn door. "Wouldn't have saved me." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He looked at her. "Men like that don't leave witnesses. I gave you up, they'd have killed me anyway. At least this way, I get to choose who I stand with." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What'd you expect?" "Someone who gave up a long time ago." Caleb let out a short, bitter laugh. "Maybe I did. Maybe this is just me being too stubborn to admit it. Maybe." Sarah leaned her head back against the wall. "Or maybe you just needed a reason to keep going." He didn't answer, but he didn't disagree either. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had lost everything, and neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Outside, the cabin burned down to embers. The prairie stretched out cold and empty under the stars. And somewhere in the darkness, the raiders regrouped, licking their wounds, planning their next move. But for now, in the fragile shelter of the broken barn, 3 people rested. And for the first time in a long time, none of them were alone. Morning came gray and bitter. Caleb woke to Ayla shaking his shoulder. He sat up fast, hand reaching for his rifle, but she stepped back. "It's okay," she said. "Nothing's wrong. I wanted to talk." He rubbed his face, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in his bones. Sarah was still asleep, curled up in the hay. Outside, the sun was just starting to rise, the light weak and cold. "Talk about what?" Caleb asked. Ayla sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She looked younger in the morning light, scared, but there was something else there too. Determination. "Last night," she said, "when you told us to run if things went bad, you weren't going to come with us, were you?" Caleb didn't answer. "You were going to stay, hold them off so we could get away." "Doesn't matter now." "Yes, it does." Her voice was quiet but firm. "You barely know us. We're strangers, and you were ready to die for us." "I was ready to not let them win." He picked up his rifle and checked the action. "There's a difference." "I don't think there is." Caleb set the rifle down and looked at her. "Why does it matter?" "Because I need to understand why you'd do that, why you'd risk everything." He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the photograph. His wife, young and smiling, her hair blowing in the wind. "Her name was Margaret," he said. "We had this place for 8 years, worked the land, built the cabin, made plans, big plans." He stared at the photograph. "Then she got sick, fever, took her in 3 days. I couldn't do anything, couldn't save her, couldn't even make it hurt less." Ayla's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I told myself after she died that I was done trying, done caring, that it was easier to just be alone." He put the photograph away. "But when I found you two in the snow, I couldn't walk away. And I don't know why. Maybe because you looked the way I felt, lost, done. Maybe because Margaret would have kicked my ass if I left you there." He met Ayla's eyes. Or maybe I was just tired of being alone. Isla didn't say anything. She just reached out and put her hand on his, a small gesture that said more than words could. "Thank you," she said. Caleb nodded. Then he stood, slinging his rifle over his good shoulder. "We should move. Sun's up." Sarah was already awake, standing by the barn door, looking out at the ruins of the cabin. Smoke still rose from the blackened timbers, thin and gray against the pale sky. "Everything's gone," she said. "Not everything." Caleb walked past her, surveying the damage. "Barn's still standing. We've got food, ammunition, horses in the back pasture if they didn't bolt. And a target on our backs?" "That too." Sarah turned to face him. "So what's the plan?" "We fortify. Here, the barn's defensible if we do it right. Better sight lines in the cabin. Only one door. We stack hay bales for cover, block the broken sections of the roof, and wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to come back." Ayla stepped out of the barn, wrapping her arms around herself. "You think they will?" "I know they will." Caleb started walking toward the pasture. "They lost men. That means they lost pride. They'll come back to settle it. And you think we can hold them off again?" "I think we don't have a choice." They spent the morning preparing. Caleb found 2 of his 3 horses still in the back pasture, scared but unharmed. He brought them into the barn and tied them in the stalls. They'd need them if things went bad. Sarah and Ayla worked on the fortifications, dragging hay bales into position, covering the gaps in the walls with whatever they could find. Old boards, pieces of the wagon, even saddles. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. By midday, the barn looked different, harder, meaner. Caleb stood in the center and nodded. "It'll do." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. "How long do we wait?" "As long as it takes." That's not reassuring. Wasn't trying to be. Ayla climbed down from the loft where she'd been stuffing hay into the gaps in the roof. "What if they don't come? What if they decided we're not worth it?" "Then we got lucky." Caleb leaned his rifle against the wall. "But I wouldn't count on it." They ate in silence, dried meat, hard bread, water from the well. The food was bland, the water cold, but no one complained. They were alive. For now, that was enough. As the sun began to set, Caleb took first watch. He positioned himself by the door, rifle across his knees, and stared out at the prairie. The light faded slowly, turning the snow from white to blue to black. Behind him, the sisters talked in low voices. He couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. It was the sound of 2 people trying to hold on to something normal in a world that had gone sideways. He understood that. Sarah came to sit beside him after a while, her own rifle in hand. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, watching the darkness gather. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked finally. "Just packing up and starting over somewhere else?" "Every day for 5 years." "Why didn't you?" "Because this is home. Or it was." He glanced back at the ruins of the cabin. "Hard to leave the place where you buried your life." Sarah nodded. "I get that." "Do you?" "Yeah." Her voice was soft. "We had a home too. It wasn't much. Just a few buildings, some fields, but it was ours. And when they burned it, it felt like they burned us too." Caleb looked at her. "That's why you stayed, isn't it? In the barn. You could have run last night. Could have disappeared while I was fighting, but you didn't." "No." "Why?" Sarah met his gaze. "Because you didn't leave us, and I'm tired of running." They sat together in the growing dark, 2 people who had been broken and were trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together. "They're coming," Sarah said quietly. Caleb didn't ask how she knew. He just tightened his grip on the rifle and nodded. "Yeah," he said. "They are." And deep in the night, far out on the prairie, the raiders mounted their horses and began the slow ride back. This time, they weren't coming to talk. They came 3 hours past midnight. Caleb heard them when they were still a quarter-mile out. The low thunder of hoofbeats across frozen ground, the jingle of bits and spurs, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. He was already at the barn door, rifle raised, when Sarah appeared beside him. "How many?" she whispered. "More than last time." She peered into the darkness. The moon was up, casting long shadows across the snow. Shapes moved between the drifts. Riders, 8 or 9 of them, maybe more. They weren't trying to hide. They rode straight toward the barn like they owned the night. Wake Ayla, Caleb said. Sarah disappeared into the barn. A moment later, Ayla stumbled out of the hay, her face pale and eyes wide. She grabbed her rifle with shaking hands. Stay in the loft, Caleb told her. High ground. You see someone coming through that door who isn't me or your sister, you shoot. I don't know if I can. You can. His voice was hard. You will. Ayla nodded and climbed the ladder to the loft, her movements clumsy with fear. Sarah took position behind a stack of hay bales near the door, her rifle braced against the top bale. Caleb stayed at the door itself, watching the riders approach. They stopped just beyond the fence line, same formation as before. Same tall man in the wide-brimmed hat, sitting easy in his saddle like he had all the time in the world. But there were more men behind him now. 10, Caleb counted, maybe 11. The tall man dismounted. He walked forward slowly, hands visible, stopping about 30 feet from the barn. You cost me 4 men, he called out. His voice was different now, colder. The amusement was gone. 4 men and a broken promise. That's expensive. Caleb didn't answer. You listening in there? I'm listening. Good. The man took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give us those girls. And then you're going to stand there while we burn that barn down with you inside it. That's the price for making me look bad in front of my men. That's not happening. I wasn't asking. Caleb stepped into the doorway, rifle aimed at the man's chest. You can try, but I promise you, you'll be the first one to die. The tall man smiled. It was a slow, ugly thing. You think you're brave. You're not. You're just stupid. He put his hat back on. We'll see how brave you feel when you're burning. He turned and walked back to his horse. The other riders spread out, circling the barn. Caleb tracked them with his rifle, his jaw tight. They're surrounding us, Sarah said. I see them. We can't watch all sides. We don't have to. They'll come through the door. It's the only way in. What about the roof? Caleb glanced up at the broken sections, the gaps big enough for a man to squeeze through if he was determined. Ayla's up there. She'll see them. And if she freezes? She won't. You don't know that. No, Caleb admitted. I don't. The riders finished their circle. They sat on their horses, watching the barn, waiting. The tall man raised his hand. One of the riders pulled out a bottle, the same kind they'd used on the cabin. He lit the rag. Here we go, Caleb muttered. The rider hurled the bottle. It arced through the air, spinning end over end, trailing fire. It hit the side of the barn and shattered, flames spreading across the old wood. Caleb fired. The shot hit the rider in the shoulder, spinning him off his horse. The man hit the ground hard and didn't get up. 2 more riders charged forward, firing as they came. Bullets punched through the barn walls, kicking up splinters and dust. Sarah returned fire, her shots methodical, controlled. One rider jerked and fell. The other kept coming. Caleb tracked him, led him, squeezed the trigger. The rider's horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider into the snow. The man scrambled to his feet and ran for cover. Reload, Caleb said. His hands moved automatically, ejecting the spent cartridges, feeding in fresh ones. The fire on the barn wall was spreading now, crawling up toward the roof. Smoke poured through the gaps, thick and choking. Another bottle flew through the air. This one hit the roof directly above them. The flames caught fast, roaring to life in the dry hay. We're burning, Sarah said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were white-knuckled on the rifle. Not yet, we're not. 3 riders dismounted and advanced on foot, using the snowdrifts for cover. They moved smart, staggered, covering each other. Caleb waited until they were close, then fired 3 times in quick succession. 1 man went down. The other 2 dove behind a drift and stayed there. Above them in the loft, Ayla's voice rang out. Someone's on the roof! Caleb looked up. A shadow moved across the broken section, silhouetted against the flames. A man, crawling through the gap, a knife in his teeth. Shoot him! Caleb shouted. Ayla's rifle cracked. The shot went wide, hitting the roof beam. The man kept coming, dropping into the loft with a thud. Ayla screamed. Caleb spun and fired blindly up into the loft. He heard a grunt, a crash, and then silence. He started for the ladder, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Don't. You leave that door, they'll rush us. Ayla can handle herself. In the loft there was a scuffle, the sound of bodies hitting wood. A rifle clattered down the ladder and landed at Caleb's feet. Then Ayla appeared at the edge of the loft, breathing hard, her face streaked with blood. "I'm okay," she gasped. "He's not." Caleb stared at her. She held up a knife, the man's knife, still slick with blood. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were clear. "Good," Caleb said. "Now get back up there and watch that roof." Ayla nodded and disappeared back into the loft. Sarah let out a breath. "She's stronger than she looks." "So are you." "Don't get sentimental on me." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Then two more riders charged the barn, firing as they came. He and Sarah returned fire together, their shots overlapping, filling the barn with thunder. Both riders went down, one dead, one crawling away into the snow. The fire was everywhere now. The walls, the roof, the hay. The heat was unbearable, baking the air, making it hard to breathe. Caleb's eyes streamed. His lungs burned. "We have to get out," Sarah said. "Not yet." "Caleb, not yet!" The tall man was shouting orders now, his voice cutting through the chaos. The remaining riders pulled back, regrouping at a distance. Caleb counted them. 5 left. Maybe 6. "They're falling back," Sarah said. "They're thinking." "That's worse." "Yeah." The tall man dismounted again. He stood there in the snow, staring at the burning barn, his face hard and angry. Then he drew his pistol and started walking forward, alone. "What's he doing?" Sarah asked. Caleb raised his rifle. "Something stupid." The tall man kept walking, slow, deliberate. He didn't flinch when Caleb aimed at him, didn't stop, just kept coming, pistol at his side. "That's far enough," Caleb called out. The man stopped. He was 20 feet away now, close enough to see the scars on his face, the coldness in his eyes. "This is over," the man said. "You're burning. Your barn's gone. You've got nowhere to run." "Then why are you still talking?" "Because I respect a man who fights." The tall man tilted his head. "But respect doesn't change the outcome. You're going to die tonight, all 3 of you. The only question is how much pain you want to go through first." Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. "I could end this right now." "You could, and my men would rush this barn and kill those girls before you could reload." The tall man smiled. "But I'll make you a deal. You walk out here, face me like a man, and I'll let them go. You have my word." "Your word's worth nothing." "Maybe, but it's the only chance they've got." Sarah stepped up beside Caleb. "Don't." "He's right," Caleb said quietly. "It's the only play. It's suicide. It's a chance." He looked at her. "You take Ayla and the horses. Ride hard. Don't stop until you're clear." "We're not leaving you." "Yes, you are." "No." Sarah's voice was hard. "We're not." Caleb started to argue, but then Ayla's voice came from the loft. "He's lying." Everyone looked up. Ayla was standing at the edge of the loft, her rifle aimed at the tall man. "There are men behind the barn," she said. 3 of them, waiting. "They're going to shoot us the second we step outside." The tall man's smile faltered. Just for a second. But it was enough. Caleb turned back to him, his rifle steady. "You heard her. The girl's mistaken." "No, she's not." Caleb took a step forward. "You were never going to let them go. You were just buying time." The tall man's hand twitched toward his pistol. Caleb fired. The shot caught the man in the chest, punching him backward into the snow. He lay there, gasping, staring up at the sky. His mouth moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Then he went still. For a moment, everything was silent except for the roar of the flames. Then the remaining riders opened fire. Bullets tore through the barn walls, ripping through wood and hay. Caleb and Sarah dove behind the hay bales, returning fire as fast as they could. Above them, Ayla was shooting too, her shots wild but enough to keep the riders honest. One rider broke cover and charged. Caleb tracked him, fired, missed. The man kept coming. Sarah fired. The man stumbled, but didn't fall. He reached the barn door and raised his pistol. Caleb shot him point blank. The man collapsed in the doorway. "That's 5 down," Sarah said, breathing hard. "How many left?" 3. Maybe 4. "We're out of time." She was right. The fire had consumed half the barn now. The roof was collapsing, sending burning beams crashing to the floor. The smoke was so thick Caleb could barely see. His chest heaved, lungs screaming for air. We go now, he said. Out the back, through the stalls. Ayla, get down here. Ayla scrambled down the ladder, her face black with soot. Sarah grabbed the horses, pulling them toward the rear of the barn. Caleb covered the door, firing twice more to keep the riders back. Then they ran. Caleb kicked open the back wall, rotten wood that gave way easily, and they poured out into the night. The cold air hit like a fist, sharp and clean after the smoke. The horses balked, scared by the fire, but Sarah held them steady. Mount up, Caleb said. They climbed onto the horses, Ayla behind Sarah, Caleb alone on the second horse. Behind them, the barn groaned and collapsed, sending sparks and embers spinning into the sky. Gunfire erupted from the front of the barn. The riders had seen them. They were coming around, shouting, firing. Ride, Caleb shouted. They kicked their heels and the horses bolted, racing across the snow. Bullets whined past them, kicking up powder. Caleb leaned low, urging his horse faster. Beside him, Sarah did the same, Ayla clinging to her waist. They rode hard, the prairie opening up before them, wide and endless. The gunfire faded behind them, swallowed by the wind and the distance. But Caleb didn't slow. He kept pushing, kept riding, until the barn was just aglow on the horizon and the night surrounded them completely. Finally, when his horse was heaving and stumbling, he pulled back on the reins. Sarah stopped beside him. They sat there in the darkness, breathing hard, the cold seeping into their bones. Everyone okay? Caleb asked. Alive, Sarah said. That'll do. Ayla slid off the horse and collapsed into the snow. She sat there, her head in her hands, shaking. Sarah dismounted and knelt beside her. You did good, Sarah said softly. I killed someone. Ayla's voice was small, broken. I stabbed him. I felt it. I felt him die. I know. I didn't think it would feel like that. Sarah pulled her sister close. It never does. Caleb stayed on his horse, looking back toward the burning barn. The fire was just a smudge of light now, small and distant. His home, his life, everything he'd built. Gone. He should have felt something, grief, anger, loss. But there was nothing, just a hollow emptiness where the feeling should have been. Caleb, he looked down. Sarah was standing beside his horse, looking up at him. You okay? She asked. Yeah. Liar. He almost smiled. Yeah. Sarah reached up and put her hand on his. We're alive. That's what matters. Is it? It's all that ever matters. Caleb looked at her, then at Ayla, still sitting in the snow, her face buried in her hands. Two strangers. Two people he'd found dying in a storm. And now they were all he had left. We need to keep moving, he said. They'll come after us once they regroup. Where do we go? I don't know. Away. Somewhere they can't find us. That's not a plan. It's the best I've got. Sarah nodded. She helped Ayla to her feet and they mounted the horse together. The three of them sat there in the snow, the cold pressing in from all sides, the night stretching out forever. Which way? Sarah asked. Caleb looked at the stars, trying to find north, trying to find anything that made sense. Then he pointed east, where the sky was just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. That way. They rode into the growing light, three people running from a past that wouldn't let them go, toward a future that didn't exist yet. And behind them, the barn burned down to ash, taking with it the last piece of the life Caleb had known. But he didn't look back, not once. They rode until the horses couldn't go any farther. The sun was fully up now, bright and harsh, reflecting off the snow in a way that hurt to look at. Caleb's eyes ached. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, and he could feel blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. But he didn't stop, not until his horse stumbled and nearly went down. Here, he said, pulling up beside a shallow ravine. We rest here. They dismounted and led the horses down into the ravine, out of the wind. There was a thin line of scrub brush along the bottom, bare branches that offered little cover but better than nothing. Caleb tied the horses and sat heavily against the bank, his legs finally giving out. Sarah and Ayla collapsed beside him. None of them spoke. They just sat there, breathing, feeling the cold seep through their clothes. After a while, Ayla pulled out a canteen and took a long drink. She passed it to Sarah, who drank and handed it to Caleb. He finished what was left. "How far do you think we came?" Ayla asked. 5 miles? Maybe 6? Is that enough? No. Sarah leaned her head back against the frozen earth. How long before they catch up? Depends how bad we hurt them. If they're smart, they'll lick their wounds and let us go. And if they're not smart, then they'll be here by nightfall. Ayla hugged her knees to her chest. I'm tired of running. I know. I want to stop. I want to feel safe again. I know. But we can't, can we? Caleb looked at her. Her face was streaked with soot and dried blood, her eyes red-rimmed from smoke and tears. She looked young, fragile, but there was steel underneath now. He'd seen it in the loft when she'd fought that raider with nothing but a knife in desperation. Not yet, he said, but someday. You really believe that? He wanted to lie, wanted to tell her yes, that everything would be fine, that they'd find somewhere safe and start over. But he'd buried too many lies already. I don't know, he said, but I have to. Sarah stood and walked to the edge of the ravine, staring out at the prairie. We need a real plan, not just running, not just hoping. I'm open to suggestions. There's a town, she said, 3 days east, Granger's Creek, small, quiet. My father mentioned it once, said it was far enough from the rail lines that most trouble passed it by. 3 days is a long time. We don't have food, we don't have shelter. We've got horses, rifles, each other. She looked at him. That's more than most people have. Caleb stood and walked over to her. He looked east, squinting against the sun. The prairie stretched out flat and empty, no towns, no people, nothing but snow and sky. Granger's Creek, he said. You sure it's there? No, but it's something to aim for. He nodded slowly. All right, we rest here for an hour, then we move. Sarah smiled. It was small, tired, but real. You're a hard man to kill, Caleb Rourke. So are you. They stood together at the edge of the ravine, two people who had survived when they shouldn't have, and for the first time since the storm, something that felt almost like hope flickered between them. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was there, and for now, that was enough. They moved again an hour later, riding slow to spare the horses. The day stretched out long and cold, the sun climbing high and then sinking low, casting their shadows long across the snow. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. When night fell, they made camp in another ravine, huddled together for warmth. No fire. Too risky. They ate what little they had, a handful of dried meat, some hard bread that Sarah had stuffed in her pockets before they fled the barn. It wasn't much, but it kept them alive. Caleb took first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees, staring out at the darkness. The prairie was silent except for the wind. No hoofbeats, no voices, nothing. Maybe the raiders had given up. Maybe they'd decided it wasn't worth it. Or maybe they were just being patient. Sarah came to sit beside him after a while. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, her breath fogging in the cold air. You think they're still following us? She asked. I think they'd be fools not to. And if they are? Then we deal with it. How? Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she said, I'm glad we found you. He looked at her, surprised. Yeah? Yeah, you could have left us to die. Most people would have, but you didn't. She met his gaze. That means something. I didn't do it to be noble. I know. You did it because you couldn't walk away. That's better. Caleb looked back at the darkness. I watched my wife die. Couldn't do anything to stop it. Couldn't save her. I told myself after that I'd never care about anyone again. It was easier that way. And now? Now I don't know. He glanced at her. But I'm tired of being alone. Sarah smiled. Good. Because we're tired of you pretending to be. She stood and walked back to where Ayla was sleeping. Caleb watched her go, then turned his attention back to the prairie. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke. Or maybe he was imagining it. He tightened his grip on the rifle and kept watching. Morning came slow and gray. They rode again, pushing east, following the direction Sarah had pointed. The landscape didn't change, just snow and more snow, stretching out forever. By midday, Ayla was swaying in the saddle. Caleb called a halt and they rested again, this time in the lee of a small hill. The wind was worse here, cutting through their clothes like knives. "How much farther?" Ayla asked. Her voice was thin, weak. 2 days, Sarah said. Maybe less. I don't know if I can make it. You can. I'm so tired. Sarah pulled her sister close. I know, but you're not alone. We're here. We're not leaving you. Ayla nodded, though she didn't look convinced. Caleb stood and scanned the horizon. Nothing. No movement, no smoke, no riders. But the feeling wouldn't leave him. The prickling at the back of his neck, the sense that something was wrong. We need to move, he said. We just stopped. I know, but we need to move. Sarah stood, her eyes sharp. You see something? No, but that doesn't mean they're not there. They mounted up and rode again, faster now, pushing the horses harder than they should. The sun climbed high and then began its slow descent. Still nothing. Still no sign of pursuit. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling. When they made camp that night, he didn't sleep. He sat with his rifle, watching, waiting, listening to every sound the prairie made. The wind, the creak of ice, the distant howl of something that might have been a wolf. And then, just before dawn, he heard it. Hoofbeats. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. He stood, his heart pounding, and woke the sisters. They're coming. Sarah was on her feet instantly, rifle in hand. How many? Don't know, but we're out of time. Ayla struggled to stand, her face pale. What do we do? Caleb looked east toward where Granger's Creek was supposed to be. Then he looked west, where the hoofbeats were coming from. We ride, he said, and we don't stop. They mounted the horses and rode into the dawn, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. And somewhere ahead, maybe real, maybe just hope, a town waited, if they could reach it, if they could survive. The horses were dying beneath them. Caleb could feel it in the way his mount stumbled, the way its breath came in ragged gasps. They'd pushed too hard for too long, and the animals were paying the price. Behind him, Sarah's horse was in worse shape, its head hanging low, foam flecking its mouth. We have to stop, Sarah called out. Not yet. The horses? I know. The hoofbeats behind them were closer now. Caleb didn't need to look back to know. He could hear them, feel them, like thunder rolling across the prairie. 3 riders, maybe 4, closing the distance with every minute. Ayla was barely holding on, her arms wrapped tight around Sarah's waist, her face pressed against her sister's back. She hadn't spoken in hours. Caleb wasn't sure if she was conscious or just too exhausted to move. The sun was high now, merciless and bright. The snow reflected the light in a way that made everything hurt, eyes, head, the deep ache in Caleb's bones. He squinted ahead, searching for anything. A town, a building, a tree line, something. There was nothing, just endless white and the thin blue line of the horizon. Caleb, Sarah's voice was strained. My horse is done. Just a little farther. It's going to collapse. Then we'll walk. They'll catch us. I know. Sarah pulled up hard, her horse stopping so abruptly it nearly buckled. Caleb circled back, his own mount heaving. What are you doing? What I should have done an hour ago. Sarah slid off the horse, bringing Ayla with her. We can't outrun them, not like this. So what? We just wait for them to kill us? No, we make a stand. She pulled her rifle from the saddle and checked the chamber. Right here. Caleb looked around. They were in the open, no cover, no shelter, nothing but flat ground in every direction. It was the worst possible place to fight, but she was right. The horses were finished. They couldn't run anymore. All right, he said. He dismounted and pulled his own rifle. But we do it smart. Spread out. Make them work for it. They positioned themselves in a rough triangle, 20 feet apart, the horses between them. Ayla sat in the snow, her rifle across her lap, her face blank and empty. Sarah stood to Caleb's left, her jaw set, her eyes hard. Caleb stood in the center, watching the western horizon. The riders appeared a few minutes later. 4 of them, moving fast, their horses fresh and strong. They saw Caleb and the sisters and slowed, spreading out into a line. Then they stopped, just beyond rifle range, and sat there, watching. "They're waiting," Sarah said. "For what?" "For us to make a mistake." Caleb raised his rifle and sighted down the barrel. Too far. He'd waste the shot. He lowered it again. One of the riders dismounted and walked forward. Not the tall man. He was dead, buried in the snow outside the barn. This one was younger, leaner, with a scar running down the side of his face. He stopped about 100 feet out and called over. "You made us chase you a long way." Caleb didn't respond. "Cost us time. Cost us men. Cost us patience." The man spat into the snow. "But we're here now, and you're out of places to run." "Then come get us," Caleb called back. The man smiled. "Oh, we will. But first, I want to make sure you understand something. You killed our boss, killed half our crew. That's a debt, and we always collect. Your boss was a murderer, so are you. Maybe, but we're alive, and you're about to be very dead." The man turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted up, and the 4 riders started forward at a walk, slow, deliberate. They weren't in a hurry. They knew how this ended. "Wait for my signal," Caleb said. His voice was calm, steady. "When I fire, you fire. Aim for the horses if you have to. Just put them down." Sarah's hands tightened on her rifle. "Understood." Ayla, the younger sister, looked up at him. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but she nodded. "I'm ready." The riders came closer, 50 feet, 40, 30. Caleb's finger rested on the trigger. He picked his target, the lead rider, the one with the scar. He took a breath, held it, squeezed. The rifle cracked. The lead rider jerked and fell from his saddle, hitting the snow hard. His horse bolted. Sarah and Ayla fired a heartbeat later. One shot missed. The other caught a horse in the shoulder, sending it screaming and thrashing. The rider dove clear. The remaining riders opened fire, their pistols cracking in the cold air. Bullets kicked up snow around Caleb's feet. He dropped to one knee, reloaded, fired again. Another rider went down. 2 left. They were charging now, pistols blazing, closing fast. Caleb fired and missed. Sarah fired and hit one in the chest. The man slumped but stayed in the saddle, his horse carrying him past them and out into the prairie. The last rider was almost on them. Caleb raised his rifle, but the rider was too close, moving too fast. The man aimed his pistol at Sarah. Ayla shot him. The bullet caught the rider in the side, spinning him off his horse. He hit the ground and rolled, coming up with his pistol still in hand. He fired twice. The first shot went wide. The second hit the snow at Caleb's feet. Caleb shot him in the chest. The man fell back and didn't move. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and the ragged breathing of the 3 people still standing. Caleb lowered his rifle slowly, his hands shaking. "Everyone all right?" "Yeah," Sarah said. Her voice was hoarse. Ayla didn't respond. She was staring at the man she'd shot, her rifle still raised, her finger still on the trigger. "Ayla," Caleb said gently, "it's over." She lowered the rifle. Then she turned and walked away, out into the snow, and bent over and vomited. Sarah started to go after her, but Caleb stopped her. "Give her a minute." They stood there in silence while Ayla emptied her stomach into the snow. When she finally straightened, she was crying, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah went to her then and pulled her close. Ayla buried her face in her sister's shoulder and wept. Caleb turned away. He walked to the bodies, checking each one. All dead except the one Sarah had hit in the chest. He was still breathing, shallow and wet. Caleb knelt beside him. The man's eyes were open, staring at the sky. "You got anything to say?" Caleb asked. The man coughed. Blood bubbled at his lips. "We weren't the only ones." "What?" "There's more. Back west. A whole camp of us." The man coughed again, harder. "You think this is over. It's not. They'll come. They always come." "How many?" The man smiled. It was a broken, ugly thing. "Enough." Then he died. Caleb stood and walked back to the sisters. Sarah looked at him, her arms still around Ayla. "What did he say?" "Nothing important." It was a lie, and she knew it, but she didn't push. "What now?" she asked. Caleb looked east toward where Granger's Creek was supposed to be. Then he looked at the bodies in the snow, the exhausted horses, the 2 women who had already lost everything once. "Now we move," he said. "Before anyone else shows up." They gathered what they could from the dead men, ammunition, a canteen of water, some dried meat. Caleb took one of their horses, a sturdy roan that looked like it could go another few miles. They left the bodies where they fell. As they rode away, Ayla finally spoke. "Is it ever going to stop?" "I don't know," Caleb said. "I'm tired of killing." "I know, but I'll do it again if I have to." Caleb looked at her. There was something different in her face now, something harder. The fear was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You will." They rode in silence after that, the sun climbing higher, the prairie stretching out forever. And somewhere behind them, more men were coming, always more men, but for now they were alive, and they kept moving. Granger's Creek appeared on the horizon 2 days later. At first, Caleb thought it was a mirage, just a smudge of dark against the white, a trick of the light. But as they got closer, the smudge resolved into buildings, small wooden structures clustered along a frozen creek, smoke rising from a handful of chimneys. "Is that it?" Ayla asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Think so," Sarah said. They rode down the slope slowly, cautiously, rifles ready. The town was small, maybe 20 buildings in total. A general store, a stable, what looked like a boarding house. A few homes scattered along the creek. No church. No sheriff's office. Just a place where people lived and tried to stay out of trouble. A few folks were out on the street, bundled against the cold. They stopped and stared as Caleb and the sisters rode in. A woman carrying a bucket of water. An old man chopping wood. A boy, no more than 10, standing in the doorway of the stable. Caleb pulled up in front of the general store and dismounted. His legs nearly gave out when his feet hit the ground. He steadied himself against the horse. The door to the store opened and a man stepped out. He was in his 50s, heavy-set, with a thick beard and suspicious eyes. "Help you?" he asked. "We need supplies," Caleb said. "Food, ammunition, whatever you've got." The man looked at him, then at the sisters, then at the horses. His eyes lingered on the blood staining Sarah's coat, the soot on Ayla's face. "You running from something?" "That's our business." "It becomes my business when you bring it to my town." Caleb met the man's gaze. "We're not looking for trouble. We just need supplies. We can pay." "With what?" Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were a few coins, all he had left from selling cattle 6 months ago. He tossed the pouch to the man. The man opened it, counted the coins, then nodded. "All right, come inside." The store was warm, a fire crackling in the stove in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods, sacks of flour, coils of rope. The man walked behind the counter and crossed his arms. "What do you need?" "Food. Enough for 3 people for a week. Coffee, salt, ammunition if you've got it." "What caliber?" Caleb told him. The man nodded and started pulling items off the shelves, stacking them on the counter. Sarah and Ayla came in a moment later, standing close to the stove, soaking up the heat. The man glanced at them. "You 3 look like you've been through hell." "Something like that," Sarah said. "You planning to stay?" "Don't know yet." "Well, if you do, there are rules. No fighting, no stealing, no bringing trouble to other folks' doors. Break those rules and you'll answer to the whole town." "Fair enough," Caleb said. The man finished gathering the supplies and wrapped them in brown paper. "That's everything. Coins just about cover it." Caleb took the packages and handed them to Sarah. "There a place we can stay?" "Just for a few nights." "Boarding house at the end of the street. Mrs. Brennan runs it. Tell her Davis sent you." "Appreciate it." They walked out into the cold, carrying the supplies. The boarding house was exactly where Davis said it would be, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Caleb knocked on the door. A woman answered, small and gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Yes?" "Davis sent us, said you might have rooms." Mrs. Brennan looked them over. "How many?" "2 rooms. One for me, one for them." "How long?" "Few nights. Maybe more." "Payment up front." Caleb pulled out the last of his coins and handed them over. Mrs. Brennan counted them, then nodded. "Upstairs, 1st and 2nd doors on the right. Meals are at 6 and 8, breakfast at 7. No noise after 9. "Thank you." She stepped aside and they climbed the narrow stairs. The rooms were small and plain, a bed, a chair, a wash basin. But they were warm and dry, and after days on the prairie, they felt like a palace. Caleb dropped his pack on the floor and sat on the bed. His whole body ached, his shoulder throbbed, his head pounded, but for the first time in weeks, he felt something close to safe. There was a knock on the door. Sarah stood in the hallway, her arms crossed. "You okay?" she asked. "Tired." "That's not an answer." Caleb looked at her. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm scared." Sarah stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Of what?" "That this isn't over. That we'll never be able to stop. That one day we'll run out of bullets or luck or both, and that'll be it." "Maybe you're right." "That's not comforting." "It's not supposed to be." She sat down in the chair. "But we're here. We made it. And for now, that's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be." Caleb leaned back against the wall. "That man I talked to, before he died, he said there were more of them. A whole camp. Said they'd come after us." Sarah's expression didn't change. "How many?" "He didn't say, but enough." "Then we'll deal with it when it happens." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She stood and walked to the door. "Get some rest. You look like death." "Thanks." She smiled. It was small, but genuine. "You're welcome." After she left, Caleb lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He should have felt relief, safety, something, but all he felt was the weight of the dead men behind them and the ones still coming. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. It didn't come easy. The next few days passed quietly. Caleb spent most of his time at the boarding house, recovering. His shoulder healed slowly, the bandage Sarah had tied turning from red to brown. Ayla stayed in her room, barely eating, barely speaking. Sarah moved between them, checking on her sister, checking on Caleb, holding them all together through sheer force of will. On the fourth day, Caleb went out to the stable to check on the horses. They were doing better, their ribs not quite as visible, their eyes clearer. He brushed them down, talking to them in low tones. "You did good," he said to his horse. "Better than I had any right to ask." The horse nuzzled his hand. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. Caleb turned. It was the boy from the street, the one who'd been standing in the stable doorway when they rode in. "Help you?" Caleb asked. "Just watching." The boy stepped closer. "You're the one who came in with the two ladies." "That's right. People are talking. People always talk. They're saying you're running from raiders, that you killed a bunch of them." Caleb didn't respond. The boy's eyes widened. "Is it true?" "Go home, kid." "My name's Ben." "Go home, Ben." Ben didn't move. He looked at the horses, then at Caleb. "My pa died 2 years ago. Raiders burned our farm, killed him. My ma and me barely got out." Caleb stopped brushing the horse. "I'm sorry. Everyone says you can't fight them, that you just run and hope they don't catch you." Ben looked at him. "But you fought, and you won. We survived. That's not the same as winning." "Seems like it to me." Caleb set the brush down. "You want to know the truth? We got lucky, that's all. We had guns and stubborn hearts and dumb luck. Next time we might not." "But you tried." "Yeah, we tried." Ben nodded slowly. "That's more than most people do." He turned and walked away, his boots crunching in the snow. Caleb watched him go, then went back to the horses. But Ben's words stayed with him, rattling around in his head. That night, Sarah knocked on his door. "You awake?" "Yeah, come in." She stepped inside and closed the door. "Ayla's finally eating. Not much, but something." "That's good." "She asked about you." "What'd she say?" "Wanted to know if you were okay. I told her you were." Sarah sat in the chair. "Was I lying?" Caleb looked at her. "I don't know." "That's honest." "It's all I've got." They sat in silence for a while. Then Sarah said, "I've been thinking about what happens next." "And?" "We can't keep running, not forever. Sooner or later we have to stop, find a place, make a life. This isn't that place." "Why not?" "Because those men are still out there, and they will come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll come. Then we'll be ready." "You don't know that." "No, but I know I'm tired of being afraid." She leaned forward. We survived, Caleb, against everything. We're still here. That has to mean something. It means we got lucky. No, it means we fought. It means we didn't give up. She stood. And I'm not giving up now. She walked to the door, then stopped. This place. Granger's Creek. It's not much, but it's something, a start. And maybe that's all we need. She left before Caleb could respond. He sat there in the dark, turning her words over in his mind. A start. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was where they stopped running. Maybe this was where they made a stand, not against raiders or bullets, but against the fear that had been chasing them since the beginning. Or maybe it was just another place to die. He didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. A week passed, then 2. Caleb started helping around town, doing odd jobs in exchange for food and board. He fixed a broken fence for Mrs. Brennan, patched a roof for Davis, helped the blacksmith shoe a difficult horse. The work was simple, mindless, and it felt good to use his hands for something other than killing. Sarah found work at the general store, helping Davis with inventory and keeping the books. She was quick with numbers, quicker than Davis, and he appreciated the help. Ayla stayed close to the boarding house, helping Mrs. Brennan with cooking and cleaning. She was still quiet, still haunted, but she was trying. The town accepted them slowly. Some folks kept their distance, wary of strangers, but others warmed to them. The blacksmith, a man named Carter, invited Caleb to drink with him after work one night. A woman named Ruth brought bread to the sisters, just because. It was the closest thing to normal any of them had felt in months. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't last. He was right. On the 16th day, a rider came into town. He was young, maybe 20, with wild eyes and a horse covered in sweat. He rode straight to the general store and nearly fell out of the saddle. "Raiders!" he gasped. "Coming from the west, a dozen of them, maybe more." Davis came out of the store, his face grim. "How far?" "Half a day. Maybe less." A crowd was gathering now, men and women drawn by the commotion. Caleb pushed his way to the front. "Did you see them?" he asked the rider. "Yeah, camped 5 miles out. They're armed, organized. They're not passing through. They're coming here." Someone in the crowd swore. A woman started crying. Davis raised his hands. "Everyone calm down. We've dealt with raiders before. We'll lock up, keep quiet, let them take what they want, and move on." "What if they don't move on?" someone asked. "Then we'll deal with it." Caleb stepped forward. "They're not coming for supplies." The crowd turned to look at him. Davis frowned. "What are you talking about?" "They're coming for us. Me and the sisters. We killed some of their men. They're here for payback." Davis's face went hard. "You brought them here." "I didn't know. You brought them here, and now we're all in danger." "Then tell us where they are and we'll leave. Draw them off. Keep them away from the town." "It's too late for that. If they're half a day out, they'll be here by nightfall." Davis looked at the crowd. "Everyone go home. Lock your doors. Don't come out until morning." The crowd started to disperse, muttering, casting angry looks at Caleb. Sarah appeared beside him, Ayla right behind her. "Is it true?" Sarah asked. "They're coming." "Yeah." "Then we fight." "Not here. Not in the middle of town. Too many people will get hurt." "Then where?" Caleb looked west, toward the open prairie. "Out there, where it started." Sarah nodded. "Then let's finish it." They went back to the boarding house and gathered their things, rifles, ammunition, what little food they had left. Mrs. Brennan watched from the doorway, her face tight. "You're leaving," she said. "We have to," Caleb said. "Will you come back?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. They walked to the stable and saddled the horses. Carter the blacksmith was there, along with Ben and a few other men. "You're going after them," Carter said. "We're going to lead them away from town." "That's suicide." "Maybe." Carter looked at the other men, then back at Caleb. "Then we're coming with you." Caleb shook his head. "This isn't your fight." "The hell it isn't. You think they'll stop with you? They'll burn this town just because they can. We've seen it before." Carter picked up a rifle. "We're coming. That's the end of it." Caleb wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in Carter's eyes, in the eyes of the other men. They'd made their choice. "All right," he said, "but we do this smart. No heroes, no last stands. We hit them hard and fast, then we disappear." Agreed. There were 7 of them in total. Caleb, Sarah, Ayla, Carter, Ben, and 2 other men from town. They rode out as the sun began to set, heading west toward the raiders. Toward the end. They found the raider camp just as the last light bled from the sky. Caleb lay flat on his stomach at the crest of a low ridge, Carter beside him, both men staring down at the cluster of tents and campfires below. 12 men. Maybe 13, hard to count in the failing light. They sat around their fires, passing bottles, cleaning weapons, laughing at jokes Caleb couldn't hear. "That's a lot of men," Carter said quietly. "Yeah. We're outnumbered almost 2 to 1. I can count." Carter looked at him. "You sure about this?" Caleb wasn't sure about anything, but he nodded anyway. "We don't have a choice. They come to town, people die. Innocent people. And if we die out here, then at least we tried," Carter grunted. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't argument either. He crawled backward down the slope, and Caleb followed. The others were waiting in a small depression, hidden from view. Sarah was checking her rifle for the 3rd time. Ayla sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing. Ben looked scared, but determined. The other 2 men, Miller and Hatch, local farmers, looked like they were already regretting their decision. "Well," Sarah asked, 12, maybe 13, organized, armed. They're not expecting trouble." "Good. That's our advantage." "It's not much of one. It's what we have." She stood and faced the group. "Here's the plan. We hit them fast. Fire, move. Fire again. Don't stay in one place. Don't give them a target. The goal isn't to kill them all. It's to break them, make them scared, make them run." "And if they don't run?" Miller asked. Sarah met his gaze. "Then we make them wish they had." They moved into position as full dark settled. Caleb took the west side with Carter and Hatch. Sarah took the east with Miller and Ben. Ayla stayed in the center, higher up on the ridge, positioned to provide cover fire if things went bad. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as he crawled through the snow, inching closer to the camp. He could hear the raiders now, their voices carrying on the cold air. One of them was telling a story about a woman in some town. Another was complaining about the cold. Normal conversation, like they weren't planning to burn a town and kill everyone in it. Caleb reached his position behind a snow-covered outcrop, about 50 yards from the nearest fire. He settled in, rifle braced against the rock, and waited for Sarah's signal. It came a moment later, a single sharp whistle, like a bird call. Caleb fired. The night exploded. His first shot took a raider in the chest, dropping him where he sat. Carter and Hatch fired a heartbeat later, their shots punching into the camp. Men shouted, dove for cover, scrambled for weapons. On the east side, Sarah's rifle cracked 3 times in rapid succession. Caleb reloaded and fired again, aiming for the chaos, the movement, anything that looked like a target. A raider stumbled backward, clutching his leg. Another went down, not moving. The camp was pandemonium now, men running in every direction, some firing blindly into the darkness, others trying to organize a defense. "Move!" Caleb shouted. He scrambled to his left, putting 20 feet between himself and his last position. Carter and Hatch did the same. The raiders were firing back now, their bullets whining through the air, kicking up snow, but they couldn't see their targets. They were shooting at ghosts. Caleb fired twice more, then moved again. His shoulder screamed in protest, the old wound tearing open, fresh blood soaking through his shirt. He ignored it, kept moving, kept firing. From the ridge, Ayla's rifle barked. A raider who'd been trying to flank Sarah's position went down, clutching his side. Good girl, Caleb thought. She's learning. But the raiders were adapting. One of them, a big man with a thick beard, started shouting orders, organizing the men into a defensive line. They weren't running. They were digging in. "Sarah!" Caleb called out. "They're not breaking." "I see it. What do we do?" "Keep shooting." Caleb fired until his rifle was empty, then reloaded with shaking hands. Beside him, Hatch took a bullet to the arm and went down with a cry. Carter dragged him back behind cover, cursing. "How bad?" Caleb asked. "Bad enough. He's out." That left 6 of them against 12. The odds had just gotten worse. The big raider was advancing now, leading 4 men in a coordinated push toward Caleb's position. They moved smart, using cover, suppressing fire. Caleb fired twice, hitting one man in the shoulder, but the others kept coming. "We need to fall back," Carter shouted. "Not yet." "Caleb, not yet. Then Sarah did something Caleb didn't expect. She stood up, stepped into the open, and fired 3 times in quick succession. All 3 shots hit. 3 raiders went down. And in that moment, the big man's attention shifted from Caleb to her. "Sarah, get down!" Caleb screamed. She dove behind a snowbank just as bullets tore through the space where she'd been standing. The big man was coming for her now, his face twisted with rage. Caleb didn't think. He just moved. He ran straight at the big man, firing as he went. His first shot missed. His second caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The big man raised his pistol, and for a frozen moment they stared at each other across 15 feet of snow. Then Ayla shot him from the ridge. The bullet hit the big man in the back, punching through and dropping him to his knees. He swayed there for a moment, his mouth working silently, then fell face first into the snow. The remaining raiders broke. It happened all at once. One man threw down his rifle and ran, then another, then 2 more. Within seconds, they were scattering into the darkness, abandoning their camp, their supplies, their wounded, running for their lives. "Hold your fire," Caleb shouted. "Let them go." The shooting stopped. The night went silent except for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of the campfires. Caleb stood there, breathing hard, his rifle still raised, waiting for the trick, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. Carter climbed to his feet, his face pale. "Did we just win?" "We survived." Caleb lowered his rifle. "That's not the same thing, but it felt close enough." They spent the next hour dealing with the aftermath. The raider camp had 8 dead, 3 wounded. Caleb and Carter tied up the wounded men and left them by the fire. Someone would find them. Or they wouldn't. Caleb didn't much care which. Hatch's arm was broken, the bone shattered by a bullet. Miller wrapped it as best he could, but the man needed a doctor. They'd have to get him back to town. "You did good," Caleb told him. Hatch grimaced. "Don't feel like it. You're alive. That's good enough." They searched the camp, taking what supplies they could carry. Ammunition, food, a few blankets. Then they set fire to the tents and walked away, leaving the flames to consume what was left. The ride back to Granger's Creek took most of the night. No one spoke. They were too exhausted, too wrung out. Ayla rode with Sarah, her head resting against her sister's back, asleep or just too tired to stay upright. Ben rode close to Carter, his hands shaking on the reins. Caleb rode at the front, alone with his thoughts. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. And survival, Caleb was learning, had a cost that didn't show up in the body count. When they finally rode into town, the sun was just beginning to rise. The streets were empty, everyone still locked in their homes, too scared to come out. Caleb dismounted in front of the boarding house and nearly collapsed. His legs wouldn't hold him. Carter caught his arm and steadied him. "Easy." "I'm fine. You're bleeding through your shirt." Caleb looked down. Carter was right. The old wound had opened completely, fresh blood soaking through the bandage and staining his coat. "It's nothing. It's not nothing. Come on." Carter half carried him into the boarding house. Mrs. Brennan met them at the door, her face going pale when she saw the blood. "He'll live," Carter said, "but he needs stitches." Mrs. Brennan nodded and led them to the kitchen. She cleared the table and Carter laid Caleb down on it. Sarah appeared in the doorway, took one look at him, and crossed the room. "What happened?" "Old wound opened up," Caleb said. "It's fine." "Stop saying that." She turned to Mrs. Brennan. "You have a needle and thread?" "Yes, and whiskey." "Bring both." Mrs. Brennan returned with a sewing kit and a bottle. Sarah poured whiskey over the needle, then looked at Caleb. "This is going to hurt." "I know." She cut away the old bandage and the blood-soaked shirt beneath. The wound was ugly, ragged, the edges torn and inflamed. She poured whiskey directly into it. Caleb hissed, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Sorry," Sarah said. "Just do it." She threaded the needle and began to stitch. Her hands were steady, practiced, moving with the kind of certainty that came from having done this before. Caleb focused on the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, anything to keep his mind off the needle pulling through his skin. "Where'd you learn to do this?" he asked through gritted teeth. "My mother told you before." "Right." She said a person who can't fix what's broken is useless in this world. Smart woman. She was. Sarah finished the last stitch and cut the thread. There, you'll live. Thanks. She wrapped a clean bandage around his shoulder and tied it tight. Then she sat back, her hands finally shaking now that the work was done. Caleb saw it and reached out, putting his hand over hers. You did good, he said quietly. Out there. All of it. Sarah looked at him. We all did. Yeah, we did. Ayla appeared in the doorway, her face pale but her eyes clear. They're gone? Yeah, Caleb said. They're gone. For good? I don't know, but for now. Ayla nodded slowly. Then she walked over and put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. The three of them sat there in the kitchen, bruised and bloodied and exhausted, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't heavy with fear. It was just silence. Mrs. Brennan brought soup and bread, and they ate like they hadn't seen food in days. Maybe they hadn't. Time had stopped meaning much somewhere between the barn burning and the fight on the prairie. When they finished, Caleb stood. His legs wobbled but held. I need to sleep. We all do, Sarah said. They climbed the stairs together, each to their own room. Caleb fell onto the bed without even taking off his boots. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was the morning light spilling through the window, soft and warm. And for the first time in 5 years, he didn't dream of his wife dying. He didn't dream at all. He woke to voices downstairs. It took him a moment to remember where he was. The boarding house. Granger's Creek. Safe. He sat up slowly, his shoulder protesting every movement, and pulled on a clean shirt that someone had left folded on the chair. When he came downstairs, he found the main room crowded. Davis was there, along with Carter, Mrs. Brennan, and a dozen other townspeople. They all turned to look at him when he appeared. There he is, Davis said. His voice was gruff, but there was something different in it. Respect, maybe. We were just talking about you. That's so. The raiders. They're gone. Scattered. Some of the men rode out this morning to check. Found the camp burned. Bodies everywhere. You and your people did that? We did. How many of you were there? 7. 3 of us. 4 from town. Davis let out a low whistle. 7 against 12, and you won. We survived. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Davis stepped forward. Look, I'll be honest. When you first rode in here, I didn't want you. Thought you were trouble. Turns out I was right. You were trouble. Caleb started to respond, but Davis held up a hand. But you also saved this town. Those raiders were coming for us. They would have burned us down, killed anyone who fought back, taken what they wanted, and you stopped them. So I'm saying thank you. We all are. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Caleb didn't know what to say. He'd never been good with gratitude. You're welcome, he managed finally. Carter stepped forward. There's something else. We took a vote this morning, town council. We want to offer you a place here, permanent, you and the sisters. Build a house, work the land, be part of the community. Caleb stared at him. You're serious, dead serious. This town needs people like you, people who don't run when trouble comes, people who fight. I'm not a fighter. I'm just a man who got tired of running. That's close enough. Caleb looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. Some were familiar now. Carter, Ben, Mrs. Brennan. Others he barely knew. But they were all looking at him with something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. I need to talk to the sisters, he said. Of course. Take your time. Caleb found them in Sarah's room. They were sitting by the window, talking in low voices. They looked up when he entered. The town wants us to stay, he said without preamble. Permanent. They're offering land. A place to build. Sarah and Ayla exchanged a glance, then Sarah stood. What do you think? I think it's dangerous. Those raiders might come back, or others like them. This place isn't safe. Nowhere is safe. I know, but Caleb? Sarah crossed the room and put her hand on his arm. We've been running for weeks. Months if you count from when our settlement burned. And I'm tired. I'm tired of being scared. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of not having a place to call home. But I want to stay. Her voice was firm. I want to stop running. I want to build something. And I think you do too. Caleb looked at Ayla. What about you? Ayla stood and walked over to them. I killed 2 people. I didn't think I could do that. Didn't think I had it in me. But I did. And it changed me. I'm not the same person who sat in that snow waiting to die. She took a deep breath. I'm scared. But I'm not helpless anymore. And if we're going to build a life, I want to do it here. With people who stood with us. Who fought for us. Caleb looked between them. 2 women who'd been strangers a month ago. 2 women he'd pulled from the snow, half dead, with no reason to save them except that he couldn't walk away. And now they were asking him to stay, to stop running, to build a life. With them. All right, he said quietly. We stay. Sarah smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, bright and unguarded. You mean it? I mean it. Ayla threw her arms around him and he staggered backward, surprised. Sarah laughed and joined them, and for a moment the 3 of them just stood there, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a world that kept trying to knock them down. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been clenched tight for 5 years. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the absence of despair, but whatever it was, it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Let's go tell them, Sarah said. They went downstairs together. The crowd was still there, waiting. Caleb cleared his throat. We'll stay, he said. The room erupted. People clapped, shook his hand, clapped him on the back. Mrs. Brennan was crying. Carter grinned like a fool. Even Davis looked pleased, though he tried to hide it. All right, Davis said, raising his hands for quiet. Let's not make a spectacle. There's work to do. We need to help them find land, get materials for building. Carter, you and Ben start marking out a plot east of the creek. Mrs. Brennan, see what supplies we can spare. Everyone else, back to your business. Show's over. The crowd dispersed, still talking, still smiling. Caleb stood in the center of it all, feeling like he'd stepped into someone else's life. Sarah touched his arm. You okay? Yeah, just strange. What is? Feeling like I belong somewhere. You'll get used to it. Maybe. You will. She squeezed his arm. Come on, let's go see this land. The plot Carter showed them was on the eastern edge of town, along the creek where the water ran clear even in winter. It was good land, flat and open, with a stand of cottonwoods providing shelter from the wind. Caleb walked the perimeter, his boots crunching in the snow, imagining what could be built here. A cabin. Small at first, but solid. A barn for livestock. Maybe a garden when spring came. A place to grow things, instead of just surviving. What do you think? Carter asked. It's good. Better than good. This is prime land. Creek never runs dry, soil's rich, and you're close enough to town that you're not isolated. Caleb knelt and dug his fingers into the frozen earth. It was hard now, but come spring it would soften. Things would grow, life would return. When can we start building? He asked. Soon as the weather breaks. Another month? Maybe 2. In the meantime, you stay at the boarding house, on the town's coin. Consider it payment for what you did. We don't need charity. It's not charity, it's payment. Fair trade. Carter held out his hand. Deal? Caleb looked at the hand, then at Carter's face. He saw no pity there, no condescension, just respect. He took the hand and shook it. Deal. Over the next few weeks, life settled into something resembling normal. Caleb worked odd jobs around town, saving money for materials. Sarah kept working at the general store, her quick mind making her indispensable to Davis. Ayla helped Mrs. Brennan and started teaching reading to some of the younger children in town. She had a patient way about her that the kids responded to. They ate meals together at the boarding house, talked about plans for the cabin, argued about where to put the barn. Normal things. Boring things. The kind of things people did when they weren't running for their lives. And slowly, day by day, the fear began to fade. Not all of it. Probably never all of it. But enough that they could sleep without jerking awake at every sound. Enough that they could walk through town without constantly checking over their shoulders. One evening, Caleb sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set. Sarah came out and sat beside him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She handed him one. Thanks. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee, watching the light fade from the sky. After a while, Sarah spoke. Can I ask you something? Sure. That day you found us in the snow. Why'd you stop? Caleb thought about it. He'd asked himself that question 100 times. I don't know. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to be left behind. To be forgotten. Your wife. Yeah, when she died, it felt like the world just kept moving and I was stuck. Frozen. Like I was buried in snow and nobody could see me. He took a drink of coffee. When I saw you two out there, I guess I just couldn't walk past. Couldn't leave you the way I felt I'd been left. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you stopped. Me too. I mean it. You gave us a second chance. A life. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Why? Because that's what people do. When they're not broken, they help. He looked at her. And maybe I needed to not be broken anymore. Sarah smiled. You're a good man, Caleb Rourke. I'm just a man. That's good enough. She stood and went back inside. Caleb stayed on the porch, finishing his coffee, watching the stars come out one by one. And for the first time in 5 years, when he thought about his wife, he didn't feel the crushing weight of grief. He felt gratitude for the years they'd had, for the lessons she'd taught him, for the way she'd made him better than he would have been alone. And he thought she'd approve of what he was doing now, building a life, helping others, not giving up. Yeah, she'd approve. Oh. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it came with a vengeance. The snow melted in rushing torrents, filling the creek until it overflowed its banks. The prairie turned from white to brown to green almost overnight. Flowers bloomed, birds returned, the world woke up. And so did the building. Carter organized a crew of men from town, and they spent 2 weeks laying the foundation for the cabin. Caleb worked alongside them, his hands blistering, his back aching, but his spirits higher than they'd been in years. Sarah and Ayla helped where they could, mixing mortar, hauling stones, cooking meals for the crew. The cabin went up slowly, board by board, nail by nail. It wasn't fancy, just 4 walls, a roof, a fireplace. But it was solid, built to last, built to be a home. On the day they finished, the whole town showed up. They brought food and drink, and someone pulled out a fiddle, and before long there was music and dancing in the yard. Caleb stood back, watching, feeling like an outsider at his own party. Ayla appeared beside him. You should dance. I don't dance. Everyone dances. I don't remember how. Then learn again. She took his hand and pulled him into the crowd before he could protest. He stumbled through a few steps, awkward and self-conscious, but Ayla just laughed and kept leading. After a while, he stopped thinking and just moved. It felt good. When the song ended, Sarah took Ayla's place. She was a better dancer, smooth and confident, and Caleb found himself actually keeping up. You're smiling, she said. Am I? Yeah, it's a good look on you. Feels strange. You'll get used to it. They danced until the sun went down and the party started to wind down. People drifted away back to their own homes, their own lives. Soon it was just Caleb, Sarah, and Ayla standing in front of the cabin, staring at what they'd built. It's really ours, Ayla said softly. Yeah, Caleb said. It is. What do we do now? Now? We live in it. They walked inside together. The interior was bare. No furniture yet, no curtains, no decorations, just empty space waiting to be filled. But it was clean and dry and solid. It was home. They spread out bedrolls on the floor and lay down, too tired to do anything else. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the prairie stretched out quiet and dark. Caleb, Ayla said after a while. Yeah? Thank you for everything. You already thanked me. I know, but I wanted to say it again. You're welcome. Silence. Then Sarah spoke. We're a family now, aren't we? Caleb thought about it. They weren't related by blood, weren't bound by marriage or law. But they'd survived together, fought together, built something together. Yeah, he said. I guess we are. Good, Sarah said. I've always wanted a stubborn older brother. Caleb snorted. And I've always wanted 2 women who argue with everything I say. Ayla laughed. It was a real laugh, light and genuine. and it echoed through the empty cabin like music. They fell asleep like that, three people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it work. Three people who'd learned that family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up, about not leaving when things got hard, about building something worth fighting for. Apache. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth having ever is. There were hard winters and dry summers, crops that failed, livestock that died. Raiders passed through the territory now and then, though never in the numbers they'd faced that night. Caleb and the sisters dealt with each one, sometimes with words, sometimes with rifles. The town learned to trust them, to rely on them. They became part of the fabric of Granger's Creek. Isla kept teaching the children, and she was good at it. She had a way of making even the hardest lessons feel manageable. She never married, though she had offers. She said she'd had enough chaos for one lifetime. She wanted quiet, peace, and she found it. Sarah took over the general store when Davis retired. She ran it with the same efficiency she'd brought to everything else. Smart, sharp, no nonsense. She married a traveling merchant who passed through town one spring and decided to stay. They had 3 children, all daughters, all with their mother's determination. And Caleb? He worked the land, built onto the cabin, added a barn, a chicken coop, a garden that actually grew things. He never remarried. Some folks thought that was strange, but he didn't see it that way. He'd had love once, he'd lost it, and what he had now was different. Not better or worse, just different. He had a family, he had a purpose, he had a place to call home. And that was enough. On his 50th birthday, he sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set over the prairie. It looked the same as it had the day he'd found the sisters in the snow. Endless, beautiful, indifferent. But he wasn't the same man. That man had been broken, lost, waiting to die. This man had scars and gray hair and hands that ached when the weather turned. But he was alive. Not just surviving, living. Sarah came out and sat beside him. She was older now, lines around her eyes, silver in her hair. But she still had that sharp gaze, that quick mind. "You thinking about the old days?" she asked. "Some. Good memories or bad?" "Both." She nodded. "That's life, isn't it? Both." "Yeah." They sat in silence, watching the light fade. After a while, Sarah spoke again. "I was talking to Ayla the other day about that winter, about you finding us." "Yeah?" She said something I've been thinking about. She said you saved us. But I don't think that's true. Caleb looked at her. No? No. I think we saved each other. Sarah met his gaze. You were dying out here, Caleb. Maybe not physically, but inside. You'd given up, and we gave you a reason to keep going, same as you gave us. Caleb thought about that. About the man he'd been the day he found them. Hollow, alone, counting down the days until the cold or the loneliness finally took him. Maybe you're right, he said. I usually am. He smiled. Yeah, you are. The sun dropped below the horizon and darkness settled over the prairie. Inside the cabin, lanterns flickered to life. Ayla was cooking dinner. Sarah's youngest daughter was playing with a doll by the fire. Life was happening. Messy and imperfect and real. Caleb stood and stretched, feeling every one of his 50 years. Come on, let's go inside. In a minute, he left her there on the porch and walked into the cabin. The smell of cooking meat filled the air. Children's laughter echoed off the walls. It was warm and bright and alive. He'd lost so much. His wife, his old life. The man he'd been before grief hollowed him out. But he'd found something too. A family. A home. A reason to keep going when everything in him wanted to stop. And maybe that was the point. Maybe life wasn't about avoiding loss. It was about what you did after. Whether you let it bury you or whether you clawed your way out and kept moving. He'd chosen to keep moving, and that had made all the difference. Sarah came inside and they sat down to dinner together. All of them. The family they'd built from nothing. And as Caleb looked around the table at the faces he'd come to love, he realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was home. Caleb died on a clear spring morning, 23 years after he'd found the sisters in the snow. He was 71 years old, and he'd been working in the garden when his heart simply gave out. He fell among the tomato plants he'd been tending, and by the time Ayla found him, he was gone. They buried him on this hill overlooking the cabin, next to a small marker he'd placed there years before. Margaret Rourke, beloved wife. Now they put a second marker beside it. Caleb Rourke, friend and family. The whole town came to the burial. Carter was there, old and bent, but still strong. Ben, now a grown man with children of his own. Davis's son, who'd taken over the store. Mrs. Brennan's daughter. Sarah's 3 girls, now women themselves. And Ayla, who'd never left Caleb's side for 23 years. Sarah spoke at the burial, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. My sister and I were dying in the snow when Caleb found us. We'd lost everything, our home, our family, our hope. And he could have walked past us. Should have, probably. We were strangers. We weren't his problem, but he stopped. He saved us. And in doing that, he saved himself. She paused, looking down at the grave. Caleb taught me that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's showing up when things are hard. It's fighting for the people who matter, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. He taught me that it's never too late to start over, to build something new, to find purpose in the wreckage. She looked up at the crowd. He was stubborn, difficult. He didn't talk much about his feelings, but he was there, always. And that's what mattered. He showed me that you don't have to be perfect to be good. You just have to try. You just have to care. She wiped her eyes. I'll miss him every day for the rest of my life. But I'm grateful. Grateful he stopped in that snow. Grateful he gave us a chance. Grateful he taught us how to live again. She stepped back, and Ayla stepped forward. She was 60 now, her hair white, her face lined. But her eyes were still the same dark brown they'd been that day in the snow. When I was young, she said quietly, I thought strength meant not being afraid. I thought it meant always knowing what to do, always having the answers. But Caleb taught me different. He taught me that strength is being afraid and doing it anyway. It's not having the answers, but trying to find them. It's failing and getting up and trying again. She knelt and placed a single flower on the grave. Thank you, Caleb, for everything. They buried him as the sun climbed high, and when it was done, they walked back to town together, the family he'd built, the community he had helped save. And though he was gone, his legacy remained, in the cabin on the hill, in the children Ayla taught, in the store Sarah ran, in the way the town came together when trouble arrived. He'd been just one man, broken and lost, and trying to survive. But in choosing to care, in choosing to fight, in choosing to build instead of give up, he'd changed everything. Not just for himself, for all of them. And that, in the end, was what mattered. Not how you started, not even how you finished, but what you did with the time in between, the choices you made, the people you helped, the life you built from the ashes of what you'd lost. Caleb Rourke had built a good life, a real life. And when the prairie wind blew across his grave, it carried with it the sound of children laughing, of families talking, of a town that endured. He would have liked that. The end never really comes for people who build something lasting. They live on in the stones they laid, the seeds they planted, the lives they touched. And on that hill overlooking Granger's Creek, in a cabin that still stood solid and strong, the family Caleb had saved and been saved by carried on. Not perfectly, not easily, but carrying on nonetheless. Because that's what he'd taught them. That's what he'd shown them. You keep going, you keep building, you keep choosing to care. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. That's what makes us human. What makes us matter. Not the absence of fear or pain or loss, but what we do in spite of it. Caleb Rourke understood that better than most. And in understanding it, he'd found his way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. To people who needed him as much as he needed them. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.